Hi, this is Judy Collins, and you're tuned into RockCellarTV. Welcome.
RockCellar TV, RockCellar TV, RockCellar TV, RockCellar TV, RockCellar TV.
Well, the first question is, how did your working partnership initiate again with Steven so many years later?
It's a miracle. I said, this is sort of like couples therapy after 50 years. We met here in Los Angeles in 1968. Time flies. And of course we had a wonderful musical relationship, and he played on Who Knows Where the Time Goes. And we had an affair during that time, which of course has been immortalized in Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, and half a dozen other songs. I always knew I suspected they were about me, and now I know he's finally confessed.
Which ones?
Helplessly Hoping, and Now Begins the Time, and lots of others, yeah. So it's very exciting to be together, to have maintained our friendship. How did we do that? I love to think about that. We never lost touch with one another. First of all, that was a very seductive song, and it got my attention, but I told him it was beautiful, but it wouldn't get me back. But apparently it has, in a way. But in any case, he and I always checked in with each other. I visited him sometimes in Florida, and sometimes I see him in New York. So over the years, we kind of kept track of how that energetic personality, which was part of both of our lives, how it was going. We were young artists, we were just making our way, so we could sort of compare notes. How is this happening? And I did perform with him on the Graham Nash television show in years ago. He played Someday Soon, and I sang it. And then we were on a big celebration for AARP in Orlando. It was a convention, and we were on, Crosby, Stills and Nash was on, I was on, Richie Havens was on. It was a triple header, fabulous show. And we sort of looked at each other, it must have been 6 years ago, and said, wait a minute, why aren't we doing this? We can do this. We're grown-ups now, we can do this. And we began to share notes about what we might sing and how we would do this. If we were going to do it, what would we do? What would we sing? And that's really how this started. And a couple years ago, we started really nailing the songs down, and at the beginning of 2017, we came out here and did rehearsals at his house, and then we made a record, and now we're on the road. We did 50 shows last year, and we still were speaking. Not only speaking, but finding lots to speak about.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Does it feel like a full circle moment to be working together with him in such close proximity and connecting creatively again?
Well, in a way, we did get to know each other well over the course of these 50 years, but we're getting to know each other a lot better. I mean, you can't perform with somebody 50 shows at a time, and now it's growing. It'll be another 50 this year, and you can't do that without getting to know somebody in pretty great detail, finding out what drives their train, what makes them happy, what doesn't make them happy, and we're awfully happy, I must say.
You spoke about, in some interviews, about the special internal dialogue that you both have together, where maybe words are not needed. Could you talk a bit about that and that connection?
The singing together was a great revelation, because we hadn't really done much of that. We recorded one song about 5 years ago for an album of mine called Bohemian. We recorded a duet of an old Tom Paxton song, and that was fine. But we didn't really know the extent of how well our voices match. That's something that you're either born with or you discover. It's magical, it doesn't go away. And it has to do with finding the right notes and the right combinations. Also, we found out that we sing in unison really well, which is hard for many artists to do. I don't know that I've found many people that I could sing well with in that range. The only other artist that I've really had any kind of long experience now, a few years, is singing with Ari Hest, who is a genius, and with whom I have written songs and with whom I've sung a lot. And I'm crazy about his voice and his shows and his writing. And of course I'm wild about Stephen Stills' songs. I mean, they're just the best. So having lived with CSNN for all these years, and of course with Buffalo Springfield too, it's so thrilling to sing those songs now.
What's your favorite one to sing of Stephen's with Stephen during your shows that you're doing now?
There are many, but I will tell you that my new song, River of Gold, is wonderful to sing with him on, and his playing is divine. I get to be on the stage with this genius guitar player, and when he takes a solo, I'm right next to him. How fabulous is that? He's renowned. He's around the world. People know what that guitar sounds like, and there's nothing like it anywhere.
Does he still surprise you musically with what he brings to the table?
Oh yes, he's astonishing. And then to have our singing and then cap it off with his playing, well, it's a very magical life. And then we get to end the show with Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. How could you not love that? And everybody stands up and dances, and I'm practically dancing on the top of the piano.
Where were you when you first heard Sweet Judy Blue Eyes?
I did not hear it when he wrote it. I heard it a few months later, heard it in May of 1969. We had ostensibly broken up, and he came to the hotel in Santa Monica to see me, to wish me happy birthday, to bring me a guitar, an old Martin guitar, which I still have, and to sing me the song. And we were both in tears when he was finished, and I couldn't believe it. And then, of course, the first time I ever heard it on the radio was CSNN in a taxi cab. I have an old boyfriend who says to me, I wonder if you remember sitting in the cabin trying not to acknowledge the fact that Sweet Judy Blue Eyes was playing, hiding under the seat. It followed you around. The song has followed us all around for decades. And with me, it was such a personal story. I said, how did you get to read my journals like this?
It is such a beautiful song.
It is such a beautiful song.
Yeah.
Nothing like it, I don't think. It was 7 minutes long and totally unique in its compatriot songs at the time. And never have I heard anything quite like it. I don't know that anybody has.
The structure is very unique, the song structure. It doesn't follow the usual forms by any means.
He said it was 4 different pieces which he put together into a suite, which makes sense. When you hear it all the way through, you can see where the lines are, but he merged them all together. There's nothing that quite gets people on their feet like that, like the end of that song. Da 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 da. It's just very exciting.
It's great. There's a great quote that you made fairly recently describing working with Stephen, the creative dialogue, as the triumph of art and friendship over time. And I thought that was a really astute observation. Can you talk about that?
There was always that link that we had that was musical and emotional, and a lot of things about our friendship and our love affair survived the time because the friendship's very, very strong, and he immediately became sort of part of my family. We went out to Denver and he took pictures of my family and me on the front porch in Denver, and he got to know my brother Denver, who came to visit him in England and visited him in Colorado when he had a house up after we had broken up, and it was very, very bittersweet falling apart. It was not easy at all because the threads were already so strong. The musical dialogue that we already had was something that neither one of us really wanted to give up. I mean, the romance was also drifting away, but it was that other part, that musical identification. You can hear it in my songs, you can hear it in his songs. I do the song I wrote for him called Houses, which he'd never heard it. And I'm doing it on stage with him playing, which is just kind of blows my mind. And then the new song that I wrote, which is The River of Gold, and other things that we recorded together on Who Knows Where the Time Goes, like Who Knows Where the Time Goes, which we're singing, I'm singing and he's playing on. So it wasn't just a romance, it was a friendship and a kind of professional association that had started with making that album, which was my 8th album. And it was a big album for me. Things like the Bird on the Wire was on it, and the song that I wrote about my father was on it. And so there was already a very deep musical connection as well as the romance. And that turned into a friendship, and the musical connection just stayed and got better and better.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Bird on a Wire, and the new album, Stills and Collins, has various interpretations of outside material as well, including Leonard Cohen. Everybody knows, and obviously you were a big part of his life in terms of kind of championing his cause. Do you want to talk a bit about that song and what drew you to, what made Leonard such a special artist?
Leonard, nothing like him, nobody like him ever that I know of, maybe centuries ago, but not recently. He and I met because I had a friend, Mary Martin, who was his classmate at McGill in Toronto, in Montreal. And she and I became friends in 1963, and we hung out together. We'd go to dinner in the village with a bunch of other women friends mostly, and she would talk about this guy that she knew in Canada who was never going to go anywhere. He was brilliant, but he was never going to go anywhere because he was so terribly obscure that his poetry was something that nobody really had the time or the patience to listen to. And I said, that's sad, too bad for him. And then she called me one day and she said, he wants to come to see you, to sing you his songs. And he came to the house, to the apartment, and he said, when he finally got to the songs, which he didn't for a while, we talked and went out to dinner and hung out for a whole day. And then he went home and I went home. And then he came back. I said, no songs. What happened? She told me you could write songs. I said, most songwriters, you know, they walk in the door, they push you aside, they sing their song, they're gone. And then if you choose to sing something, they diss you on Facebook. I don't know. It's just not something that weds one to the other. But in this case, he came back the next day and he said, I can't sing and I can't play the guitar and I don't know if this is a song. And then he sang me Suzanne, and really the rest is history. And I flipped out. Dress Rehearsal Rag, he sang me 3 songs that day. He sang me Dress Rehearsal Rag, The Stranger, and Suzanne. And I've recorded 2 out of 3. I never had done The Stranger, but I'll get to it. And I now know this was instant karmic connection with Leonard. I was the one who forced him on stage, made him sing in public, which changed his life. And he's the one who said to me, in 1967, he said, well, now you've made me famous, you know, singing all these songs, but I don't understand why you're not writing your own songs, which prompted me to write Since You've Asked, which was my first song, and to continue writing for, well, it was longer. Now it's 52 years. And so we owe a great debt one to the other. And we were friends the whole time that he was alive. I sang a lot of his songs, recorded many of his songs. He would send me these little tapes and he'd call me or leave me a note saying, choose whatever you want, they're all yours. So I did record Priests and Sisters of Mercy and The Story of Isaac and Joan, Saint Joan, and Bird on the Wire, of course. And then when he died 2 years ago, I was just beginning to have these talks with Stephen about what are we going to sing and how are we going to do this. And I thought, well, first of all, I thought he's the smartest person I ever knew because he died the morning of the election. And he left us with an album called You Want It Darker. Did we get it darker? I think so. And then I was playing, I started right away in my own concerts to sing Everybody Knows, and I played it for Stephen. I recorded it on stage someplace, and I sent it to him. And he said, we have to sing this. This is what's going on here. So Leonard's legacy for my life has been enormous. Yes, I helped him to become famous, to start singing himself, which of course was extraordinary what he did in his career. And also I had a long friendship, and he was exactly what you might imagine that he was. He was loyal, he was kind, he was a terrific friend, he was extremely generous. You couldn't ask for somebody who cared as he did or was as eloquent. And thank God I didn't have an affair with him. You know, I know people who did, and it's not a very pretty story, really. Usually. He really wound up, he said, I can't really do that very well.
That's funny. Well, you know, you were an accomplished pianist at an early age, and then you made the jump, much to the dismay of your teachers and mentors, to guitar. And I was curious, what was that draw that just pulled you in, pulled you away from piano and said, I have to play guitar, I have to be part of the folk scene?
It was those stories. When I heard the Gypsy Rover and Barbara Allen, I heard them both on the radio in Denver on some couple of Saturday mornings in a row, and that was it. That changed my life. I mean, I never had a doubt about that. It was boom, and I was sitting down to practice Rachmaninoff on the piano when I turned the radio on and I heard these songs, and I said, I'm not playing the piano anymore. I play the piano every day. I write all my songs on the piano for the most, well, I think I might have written 2 songs on the guitar in 50 some years. But it hooked me completely. And once I was in it, and this was the beginning of the great folk scare, as one of my brothers called it. So we were all starting out, and nobody had any money, and everybody wanted to write, except me. I didn't write songs. I think that's why Leonard came to see me. I mean, who was he going to go to in the village except me? He couldn't go to Tom Rush, he couldn't go to Eric Anderson, he couldn't go to Bob Dylan. No, they weren't going to listen to his songs. But he knew one person who didn't write songs, and also I'd already had 5, 6 albums, 7 albums of taking other people's songs and making them famous. So he knew what he was doing. He was a very savvy man.
You were part of that burgeoning folk scene in New York in the early 60s when it was the magic time to be there. You know, when you close your eyes and think about that period, what are the memories that are evoked by that?
It's both terrifying and exhilarating, because I don't know how I lived through it. There were so many crannies and cooks and hooks and forgotten places that could have taken me out, especially because I was an alcoholic I was just getting going then. And that was what my life was going to be a working alcoholic with a huge career. I drank for 23 years, and at the end, the last 2 years, first of all, I couldn't work anymore, I couldn't sing anymore, I had canceled. I remember somebody telling me that they saw a billboard out here in LA that said Collins cancels 45 shows. That's a killer. I mean, most artists would be finished when that happened. I was very lucky because I had a surgery on my voice, which was successful. I got sober a few months after that surgery. I got sober on April 20th of 1978, so I've been sober 40 years. And I got lucky. My whole life started. And this career, which, you know, at the time I quit drinking with much, much help, my career looked on the surface fantastic. I had, Sending the Clowns had been top 10 twice. I had huge potential. I had everything was set. You know, it was great. Grammy nominations, this, that, huge touring career. But I couldn't work. And for 2 years thank God I was at the bottom, because that's partly what helps you, I think, to be able to take advantage of what's offered. And I, of course, was lucky enough to be intervened by a doctor who sent me to treatment. And I went to Pennsylvania, where it was beautiful and springtime, and I hadn't had a happy thought in a number of years. And I certainly hadn't written anything, or I had waded through the damaged parts of the end of my drinking, so that I still showed up, except that last year where I was unable to show up at all. But I began to see that my life was actually starting. And from then on, of course, it's been extraordinary. Those years, which were the great folk years, I was in New York, I knew everybody. My manager was Harold Leventhal. He managed the Weavers. He managed Arlo Guthrie, Pete Seeger, Theodore Bickel, Alan Arkin even. And he produced everybody who came to New York. He produced Joan Baez, he produced Jacques Brel at Carnegie. And so I knew everybody who was in that incredible, productive, creative renaissance that was taking over. And it was the beginning also, all those years, that 10 years was what it took for radio to get the hang of how to get songs out there. And also the record companies learned how to promote. Danny Fields was working for Elektra, you know, he who worked for the Beatles and other people, and Danny's still around. I love Danny. So they were getting the idea of how to take this massive talent, which was coming out of the woodwork in the village and everywhere else, and make it happen, make it sell, give it to people in a way that they could purchase it, and they could listen to it, and they could buy it, and they could exchange it. And you remember when we'd get a copy of Blonde on Blonde, and then we'd sit around for months listening to it over and over again. And all the artists, so many clubs, so many places to work where you could actually get paid. Sometimes it was a basket house, but a lot, and I never did baskets. I was always on the road, which as a record executive, I now know that's the most important thing to have an artist on your label, is to have somebody who's touring. I don't know how anybody does it otherwise. And nowadays it's impossible to make a living if you're not touring. And if you're a young artist, there are all kinds of cubbyholes and ways to get into this through the internet. And I just admire these kids, young people, so much, because I don't know, it always was hard, because it was always hard work. And I've never been off the road, except for those 2 years when I couldn't work. And 3 months when I had that college kid's illness, when I was in my late 60s. I forget what it's called. Mono, yes. So I didn't drink and I didn't work for about 5 months, but that was it.
Well, you know, the folk artists certainly of the 60s used their songs to enact social and political change. I'm curious if you could talk a bit about that, and if you're seeing any folks today, no pun intended, that are also using music for that same purpose.
There's a contradiction in that, which I try in my own writing to be aware of. What you write about as an artist is everything in your life. Love affairs that break up, love affairs that start, wars, peace, what happened to your neighbor's dog, how you feel when you go out to a party and your heart's broken, what you'd like to do, how you think of the ocean, everything is possible to write about. And there were a lot of songs that came out of the 60s, and I think the most powerful are the most eloquent, that last and last and last. But there are not a whole lot of them. I mean, once you get past we shall overcome and turn, where do you go? And so writers have to write from top to bottom. They have to write the whole extent of their repertoire. And then they get to a song that's timeless. But it could be about a love affair, it could be about peace, it could be about you know, I've seen fire and I've seen rain, which is very deeply political in its own way, but it's about something other than that. It's about death. Of course, love and death are the great subjects of any kind of writing. I'm reading Lord Byron right now, his first Childe Harold, the big poem that made him so famous, and it's about his travels. A lot of people talk about their travels, including Willie Nelson. But it's all part of what goes into the politics of living, which means how you treat your kids, where you give money, whether you turn the lights out at night when you go to bed or if you're in a hotel. You know, you want to save the planet, but we can't all do it in a big way. We have to take the steps that are appropriate for us, that are optioned for us. And songwriting is a magnificent door into the life of people who are thinking about, who are conscious. I think that's it. Noel Stuckey, who was, of course, Paul of Peter, Paul and Mary, has a label that's starting up again. It's called Songs to Life, and I've recorded a couple of songs from that. I'm one of the judges on that, in that Songs to Life production, and people send him songs about social issues, all kinds of social issues. One of the songs I recorded is a song called Veterans Day, which is just magnificent, and it's basically about war. And I think that we all have, I've just written a song, I've written a lot of songs about subjects, about things that have happened. Song for Sarajevo was written when I was for the former Yugoslavia for UNICEF. And is, I think, one of my most successful songs. It's about something terrible. It's about war in the former Yugoslavia and about children who are affected by landmines. I wrote about 9/11 in a song called Kingdom Come. Probably oriented around a subject is a very good way to get a song going. I have recently written a new song called Maria, which is about the Dreamers, and it's going to come out in a month or so. And you know, it's very much about the situation that we're looking at with DACA and with the whole question of refugees and immigrants and what do you do, you know, what do they do? How are they feeling? And so the song is about how this woman feels about the fact that her daughter is a dreamer and is worried that she's not going to be able to stay here. So it's also part of my life to write a lot. So I'm always writing songs or poems and trying to keep the machine going.
Well, speaking of songs, this is my last question. What's the last song you heard that you said, darn, I wish I wrote that one, I love it?
It's a song called Between the Wars, and it's by Mary Chapin Carpenter, and I am going to learn it and sing it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you. Pleasure to talk to you.
You too.
RockCellar TV, RockCellar TV, RockCellar TV, RockCellar TV, RockCellar TV, RockCellar TV.